Hi, Nathan, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Thanks for joining me. Uh, this is just the first of what will be three separate endorsement interviews that I'll be conducting on behalf of Village Free Press. This is the first time we're going to endorse anybody in any race since I started the paper in 2013. So, well, I'm sorry. Yeah, 2013. Wow. So 8 years, almost 10 years, and we never endorsed anybody. That's how important I think this race is, for Maywood and for future Maywoodians too. So, the endorsement will be based in part on this interview. So this is just one part of it. I want to make sure that I incorporate stakeholder voices as well. So we'll be getting the input of other residents who and other stakeholders in the community as well. And we'll try to get some of that feedback both online and in person. So a lot of what I'm going to ask you today, Nathaniel, is based on interviews I've done with, lots of people. And based on your questionnaire and your campaign material, along with my own coverage that I've written about Maywood in the past. So I kind of want to just get right into it. This is really conversational. So, don't feel any undue pressure. You have not been given questions beforehand. Neither has any of the other candidates. So this is really just an opportunity for the public to kind of probe a bit deeper into your records. And I think I'll be able to see like comments as they come up.
Mm-hmm.
I won't put all of the comments on the screen or the questions, but if there are insightful questions from the public, I'll ask those too if we have time, independent on the questions that I get to ask. So I just want to dive right into it. And I know that a keystone of your campaign has been accountability and keeping the village accountable. And I know in your questionnaire you wrote that that we believe not only do we need a finance oversight team of elected officials, but those of seasoned professionals in our community. We must also hold the department heads accountable to an annually and quarterly plan of expenses. Is that something that's happening now?
Yeah. So I'm gonna say no. The reality is, I think that there's a lot of different ways from an accountability standpoint that we can go in. Last year, Trustee Sanchez started revitalized the finance committee, but the finance committee consists of the entire board. If we just had our meetings as a whole and our quarterly meetings with the finance department to do checks and balances, we wouldn't need to all be on a finance committee. I think when we talk about budgets and financing committee, you would think that we have some professionals who have a financial background in our community that would volunteer on this committee for oversight. When we did the meetings to lead to the 0% tax levy increase, we had 3 or 4 different Zoom meetings with different community stakeholders, and where I share with them the budget, share with them different information. They asked me different information back, so I would go back to the finance department and different department heads and get that information. But I think seeing how many residents actually got involved with that process, it's not impossible to have our residents be over budget and finance committee to focus on that, while we as a board do checks and balances, profit and loss, and measurements of accountability to check in and the meeting as a whole. I think that's what we should be doing.
So you want the finance committee to not be a committee of the board, but to be a standing committee among residents, just like any other commission that's permanent?
Yep. So for me, I think when we have our meetings as a whole, because we don't have meetings as a whole right now, right? So some people call them LLCs, some call them meetings as a whole, but realistically, right, it's just sitting down with all of the department heads and the board to go over different things. To me, at that time, that's when we should be discussing, warrant lists, expenses. We should be discussing how we're moving money from one line item to another, to purchase something that we didn't budget for. Like, to me, that's when those meetings start to take place. The other meetings or the other recommendations I do think should come from residents in regards to budget and financing.
Can you talk a bit about how department heads and the village manager are held account now? So how does the board hold these various people accountable currently? And what are some of your ideas if you're elected? Mayor.
Yeah. So, right now what we do a annual survey assessment on our village manager, because since we're a village manager form of government, the village manager should be the one providing the assessments of the other department heads, right? The problem that we have and the reality that we have is we have a village manager who's had his salary increased by over $40,000 since he started. We have a village manager who's gotten his $15,000 payout, except for this last year because I fought for it not to happen. But he gets 15 grand every year. He gets his salary increased every year, but he never has to answer to what he did not accomplish. So like an example, for the last fiscal year, I had 32 different things broken down by department across departments that I would have loved to receive updates, feedback, and different information for. Some trustees left some line items blank. Some mayoral candidates left multiple line items blank, but I literally filled out the assessment in the way that I believe that it should have been done because my background is human resources. So I've done assessments of staff all the time. So for me, for you not to hit even 50% or even 75% of what you were assessed to say, this is how you're going to be measured of expectation versus you just doing your job to collect your check, I think that's a problem. But when you have somebody that's been allowed to operate that way, to not ever have to answer to the board, I think that's where one of our biggest issues comes into play at. Because if they're not answering to the board, they're certainly not having their staff answer to them. And I think that's where I continuously talk about accountability and transparency. So one method thought process when it comes to accountability and transparency, the My Civic app. So I know I talk about the My Civic app a lot, but the reality with the My Civic app, it took us 8 months to get that passed, right? But then you ask the question, why did it take 8 months to bring technology if everybody's running on they're going to bring technology? But then 8 months later, they still voted against bringing new technology.
Can I interrupt and ask you to explain what My Civic is and the system that preceded it?
Sure. So the My Civic app is an application that staff can use for tracking accountability factors in regards to their work force and what their work assignments are. So say, for instance, if you have Public Works out doing assignments for the day, they can come into work, see what assignments they have for the day, close them out. So we can actually track and see, if I send out 2 people to do 10 different assignments and for a whole month, one of them is only completing 3 out of the 10 and the other one's hitting 10 every day, then those are types of things that, like, from an accountable and transparency standpoint, we can manage and work on. Right now, that's not in a system to be done and talked about and discussed. What the My Civic app also does is it puts the power back into the residents' hands. So if you're taking a picture of some graffiti on a sign, or if you're seeing a tree has fallen down, or you're seeing something's going on that's a code violation, you snap a picture of it and you report it. It goes into the system. It's upon the department heads to make sure that those things are addressed based on what department it goes to. But residents can get feedback in regards to if it's being done, how long it's going to take, what the holdup is of it being taken care of. But it provides that instead of residents saying, I call Village Hall, nobody answers, the phones just ring, I leave voicemails, I send emails. This system would allow us to track the response time from the different department heads so that we can get a more accountability and tracking standpoint. The My Civic app also helps with communication to our residents. So a lot of times, we put a lot of stuff on social media or Facebook or Instagram, Facebook, but not every resident's on Facebook and not every resident is checking their Facebook like that. So My Civic also operates as a platform that can provide alerts of different things going on in the community, creating a community calendar. And you can also set up different payment options. So your tickets, your water bill, that can also be done with the app. I mean, it's a great system and it provides a lot of different information to our residents. It's just a matter of us getting it all rolled out. The contract's been signed. We just need the rollout
So
measurements.
this voted on,
Yes. So this passed back in February.
and it passed. What was the vote?
So I want to say it was 2-5. I believe Mayor Perkins voted no for it and Trustee Brandon voted no for it. Forgive me, I cannot remember if Trustee Jones voted yes or no, but it was passed by myself, Trustee Lightford, Trustee Sanchez, and Trustee Wellington.
So how's this any different from the GovQA system that was in place before?
So staff actually did a presentation at the board meeting to showcase. It was like a 13 different checkpoint standpoint of what GovQA could do and what My Civic could do. It's about a 50% difference of accessibility. So one, GovQA is not accessible from your phone, so it's not an app. GovQA is not something that you could go on social media and report. The system that we had, it was a system that we were paying over $11,000 a year for. I'm sorry, $12,000 a year for, but everybody in staff knew that we weren't using it. So the difference is we'll actually use it. That's the biggest thing about it. You know, I questioned the GovQA system and it was like, oh yeah, we use it. I reported like 35 things in the system and never got a response on them. So that's when it made me look at like, what's a better system and how can we do measurements of success better? So GovQA is actually more expensive. The GovQA version that we had was over 10 years old. And the My Civic application, because it's more cloud-based, it consistently updates itself. So we don't have to install new software.
So the GovQA, what was, I thought I heard that My Civic was roughly the same as GovQA. They each cost about $11,000 a month or something?
Yeah, no, a year. It's an annual.
Oh, okay.
It's an annual.
Gotcha.
So GovQA doesn't provide all of the systems from a workforce flow. GovQA, like I said, it's not something that you can manage from your phone. You would literally have to go to the Village of Maywood website, go under Public Works or report an issue. There's different drop-down boxes. You would have to take the picture, then upload it to your computer, then you can report it. It doesn't send push notification to the residents when staff is taking care of it and when it's being addressed. There's a lot of things that GovQA just didn't do.
But the GovQA had certain features. It wasn't as if it was nothing, and it wasn't being used by staff. What makes you confident that staff is actually going to use this too, despite all the bells and whistles?
Sure. So for me, I think the biggest part and the biggest question is who's going to manage it, because since staff is saying they can't manage it and they don't have the staffing, what I would like to do is focus on a community relations and community communications coordinator that'll work in partnership with the village manager's office and the mayor's office to track it and to work with the different department heads to ensure everything is addressed.
So you want to hire somebody new to help manage this or administer
no.
it?
Realistically, it would be the person working in the mayor's office. So that's the first part of the rollout. Second part of the rollout.
Right now, the mayor only has a secretary.
Right.
And that's Jeanette.
Sure. So since it's a part-time mayor, you know, I dare not say what the current administrator does, but I find it very hard to believe that it takes 40 hours a week to do someone's part-time as a part-time secretary, but you're a full-time person. So it's the way I look at it is we have different systems. I take it back to like hotels and hospitality. So we would have different systems that would roll out in the hotel. So I'll take, it's a system called Hot Sauce. And that's for front office, food and beverage, and housekeeping. Initially, it would start within the performance improvement department where I would roll it out. And then we would work with the different department heads to get online with it. So right now, I know the staff that we have currently aren't necessarily interested in being held accountable or having transparency the way that I would like the next administration to be. So with those things in place, one, we would have to look into bringing people on board that are actually working towards a better Maywood. And then we would have to bring on board the system piece by piece. There is a lot that you could do with the My Civic app. So I don't want to overwhelm people just by launching it and saying, okay, now your department needs to be doing A, B, C, and D, right? It's step by step. having different departments approach it from a different angle and different ways of accountability and rolling it out. But the rollout would hopefully come from the village manager in partnership with the mayor, but definitely it's not impossible to have a system step-by-step rollout. And that would take some time to do, but it's not impossible.
So you're saying if you're mayor, you obviously get the discretion basically to hire who would be your secretary. Well, that's technically the board secretary, but that discretion has historically gone to the mayor to hire somebody in that position. You'd hire somebody else, and part of their job would be administering or helping to administer this My Civic application.
To help with the rollout of My Civic, yes.
Okay. And if you're not mayor though, and somebody else is, we still got a problem. So as a trustee, you'll still be on the board as a trustee. How would you ensure that this application that you are so in support of, how would you ensure that it's going to be, doing what you want it to do and what the residents seem to want it to do? Because it seems like a pretty good system, but we need to get people to operate it.
So with that being said, I would just have to continue to be that vocal point and take it to the residents, because to your point, the two people that voted no for it are the other candidates that are running for mayor. So I don't see them pushing it at all, but I would take it to the residents. We've already signed the contract. We're already paying for it. It needs to be something that we need to hold people accountable for. So I think back to the same way that we did the 0% tax levy. During the 0% tax levy, you've never seen in a board meeting or on a Zoom call for Village Hall at our board meeting where you had over 50 residents on a call, where you had over 20 residents doing public comment to discuss the same topic. So I think it's more of if it's not going to be taken care of by those elected officials that are choosing to say that they're running on technology, but actually not implementing technology, then it's something to take to the residents and work with them to make sure that that they're held accountable to what they promised.
So there's another application that you were in support of, and this actually was approved, I believe, by the board. This Literati app.
Yes. So the Literati app was approved last year.
Right.
So the contract is up, but we are getting it renewed. But we're getting it renewed through the donations that come in for Village Pride, Village Wide, which launches on April 24th. The Literati app.
This isn't coming out of the board's budget. I mean, the village's budget.
No.
Okay.
So, but last year it did though. So what we're working with, so with Literati, what we did was we captured over 15,000 different pieces of trash. And what we've been doing with that is working with Literati as a company to reach out to the different companies and certain issues like, number one pickup was alcohol bottles and cigarettes. So we're reaching out to those different companies to help them partner with us for a more cleaner community. So that'll pay for that. That'll pay for part of the application. And then we also have people that are paying for it. But it's more of a community engagement factor to showcase and target the different areas where we know heavy trash pickup is. And then in hopes that we'll be in a partnership again, working with the Literati app to identify the areas that need to be taken care of and need more TLC from our public works and from our code enforcement department as well. So Literati app will work good with that. It also is a great partnership with School District 89 and 209 because it comes with various education literature and softwares that they can work with the youth in regards to being more community engaged, energy engaged, environmentally engaged, and cleanup engaged.
So do you know how many people use this app?
So last year we had over 100 residents sign up for it. This year we're going to try to double that.
So it was 100 residents who signed up and used it, or 100 people who
signed up and used it. So we did a competition with residents where the youth that picked up the most trash would get $250. The resident group that picked up the most trash would get $500. So we had, I want to say, like 136 is the number that comes out to my head of residents that signed up for the Literati app. And actually, in order for you to sign up, you have to capture trash, and it takes you through the tutorial of how to do it. So you signed up for it and at least used it once.
How much did it cost?
$2,000 is the fee. So for all of the education equipment that comes for the schools, for the data collection, for the partnerships with them, and for them helping market it and all that, it's a $2,000 flat fee.
Gotcha. And in the area of accountability, you also mentioned well, you mentioned a citizen police oversight committee that you would be in favor of creating, which is a committee of you okay? It'd be a standing committee of residents, similar to the finance committee. So kind of explain what some of your ideas for this citizen police oversight committee.
So for me, when I look at communities like Berwyn, Bellwood, or Merrill's Park, they all have various police auxiliaries and volunteer police and volunteer from residents that are engaged. I think what we need when we're talking about public safety and when we're talking about community policing is a committee that's specifically focused on that. You know, there are, to Chief's point, he said in the last board meeting, even though we have a grant writer, none of the grants that they submitted for the police department were actually approved or completed. So if that committee's focused on where can we find funding for community policing, where can we find funding to upgrade our database, to update our systems, what are the issues that exist within our community? We have a MAPS program that meets in the different zones, but like, how can we get that to become more engaging? I think if you have a committee of concerned residents that are actively involved in that, then that leads to violence reduction, you know, that leads to less crime, because you're not just focusing on it as a board, you're focusing on it as a collective community.
How would this committee differ from, or are you afraid that it would duplicate some of the functions of the current Police and Fire Commission?
I mean, the Police and Fire Commission is a completely different thing. You know, they work in part, like every community has a Police and Fire Commission. They actually are the only paid commission. Mm-hmm. They deal with the hiring, the disciplinary actions. They deal with preparing employment opportunities with the training. They deal with reviewing applications, all of those types of things. That's what the Police and Fire Commission truly focus on. They don't necessarily focus on community policing initiatives. They don't focus on having advocacy towards community engagement for policing. They are actually a human resources department, if you will, for the Police and Fire Department.
Will this proposed Citizen Police Oversight Committee interface at all with the current Police and Fire Commission? Will they, for instance, communicate or will work in tandem on certain things?
So yes, so I believe that every committee and every commission should be and will be working together in the future. Realistically, one of the big things anytime I speak is breaking down the silos, right? So when we talk about breaking down the silos, also mean that within our committees that we have functioning as well, because no committees are talking to each other right now. No commissions are talking to each other right now. And I think that that's a big problem. So definitely when we're talking about staffing and we're talking about employment and we're talking about disciplinary action and we're talking about expectations of hiring, you know, the community advocacy that focuses on the oversight, as you say, that's where you focus on, yeah, we're doing recruitment for the community, but let's get some of the police officers, let's get some of these kids in for testing who actually live in the community. But then also let's partner with the Park District that operates an Explore program in partnership with the Police and Fire Department that has, you know, EMS fire as well as police exploring to prepare and get our residents ready to serve in the communities that they live in. I think that would be more so of what the Community Policing and Police Accountability Committee would focus on.
How are you going to get people to serve on these extra committees? Because Maywood already has umpteen committees, many of which are not people. So you're saying you're going to add some and get rid of others?
I'm going to consolidate them. I think we have way too many commissions and committees. I think realistically, when I look at communities that are working, each trustee would be assigned an umbrella of a committee that will cover a variety of things. And to me, each board meeting, we should be fleshing out everything that we flesh out in board meetings at the meetings of a whole. At the board meetings, each trustee should be reporting what's going on in their different committees. So I don't think right now, I think it's like 17 or 18 different commissions and committees. Mm-hmm. And I think realistically, maybe 4 of them actually meet. So I definitely want to reach out to residents. I will say, even in this campaign, right? There have been multiple residents that are willing and ready to step up and get involved and get engaged in the community, but they're so disheartened, and quite frankly, they're just disgusted in different things in the ways that they're functioning and operating.
Mm.
You know, most recently we had, I don't know if you saw the last board meeting, we had a beautification commission meeting, and the way that certain elected officials, you know, try to discredit it or just basically attack it, it's like, this is a volunteer commission from the residents. And if legal and the Illinois board is saying that we're in line with Open Meetings Act, I don't understand why there's so much venom towards a volunteer commission. But definitely it's showcasing me being different and me responding differently as a leader of our committees, and actually appreciating them and appreciating their feedback, because I think that's another thing that's missing. Committees are designed to provide, you know, we would like to see this, we have an idea of this, we are presenting this, and actually have us respond to that. And that doesn't happen right now. So I think that, you know, community engagement will be heavily a cultural shift, if you will, for what we have right now.
I want to go back a bit to you. You had some opinions about the performance assessment of the village manager. If you're mayor, are you interested in keeping the current manager that we have? He's an at-will employee.
Mr. Norfleet, I thank him for his service to the community. He has been with us for 5 years, and I appreciate his service. I would not be interested in extending that contract. His contract ends in April, and I would not be interested in extending that.
So I want to get back a bit to accountability among department heads in particular. I get a lot of calls from employees who feel that they are being harassed by various department heads. Lots of complaints. They feel that the culture in the police and in the police department and in Village Hall is very retaliatory, and they don't feel like anybody on the board is hearing them. Even with the current board members and the mayor, nobody seems to have. Nobody seems to. I don't know what's being done about it, other than people just, you know, calling me to try to write articles about this, and that don't ever, you know, lead to anything. How are you going to increase accountability among department heads so that you don't have employees who are some of whom are scared to go into work, it seems?
Right. I think one big part, like I said, so for one of the biggest things I think that we need to do is relocate the village mayor's office out of the police station to Village Hall to work in partnership with the village manager. As long as we have a village manager form of government, we need to be working together and collaborating together, not working out of two different locations. When that being said, you know, the board hires and fires the village manager. The village manager is the person who handles all the other department heads. So it would be very important and essential to find a village manager who does see these same issues that our residents see, that our employees see within the various different department heads. And then it's the board's job and the Mayor Heavely's job to work with the village manager to replace various different roles, to, you know, change up different roles, and to actually put measurements of success and hold different roles accountable. I think the biggest issue in the village right now is there are no measurements of accountability for any department head, because the village manager doesn't even hold himself accountable to the measurements that have been assigned to him. So that's one. The other part I believe that needs to happen is, you know, when working in corporate, we always have meetings with the general manager. So say like the mayor is the general manager of the property. You need to actually meet with your staff. So one thing that I would work on is monthly, at least once a month, going to lunch with 5 or 7 staff members, and actually getting feedback of what best practices needs to be updated, what needs to be done in your department, what are problem issues that are in your department. One of the other biggest things that I've asked for quite some time now is an employee survey that provides an opportunity for the different departments to express themselves in a confidential manner. The employee surveys can come with areas to expand upon how they answer a question, and that type of feedback is what will be needed. And realistically, it's a confidential survey, so there's no way that your boss can come back and say, "Oh, you're the one that said it." And then also, we just need to work on the bullying. I mean, even sometimes at the board meetings, you'll see different department heads speaking to residents, speaking to business owners in a very rude and disrespectful manner. So I think we have to truly look at a cultural mental shift of what customer service is and what resident service is. And they need to realize, like, realistically, the people that you're treating this way are the people who pay your salaries. And I think once we start focusing on it from that standpoint and encouraging and working with our staff to feel like it's a good work-life balance and feel like it's a good space to work in and provide the services to our residents, then the better we'll be.
Now, I will say I've spoken to several people who have called you a bully and who take issue with some of your approaches to certain things. Are you a bully? And if you're mayor with the power that you have, is the qualities that you just talked about that need to be changed, are those going to be exhibited in your office, or will community members know that you're somebody who will be collaborative and cooperative and even with people who may not necessarily agree and may not be agreeable?
I think that I most certainly would not call myself a bully at all. I believe and I'm proud of the fact that I am a very results-driven individual, and I don't believe in allowing things that I know can be done to have excuses given as to why they can't be done versus laying out how they can be done. So I think when there's a difference between someone holding someone accountable and someone not letting something go once you've committed yourself to taking care of something versus being a bully. Like, a bully is just like I'm not that. A bully is a person who's just I'm in charge and I'm in control. Like, that's not my personality. It's if we've laid something out and if we've agreed upon it and there's a timeline to it and you're not meeting that metrics of success or measurements of success, then that's where the problem comes in. It's not me. So that's more of my personality from an organizational development standpoint. If you're not hitting your metrics and if you're not hitting the goals, then let's talk about why that's not happening and how I can support you to make it happen. Because I always say it, and this is like what I've led with in my HR background for over 15 years. It's like, I can't fire anybody, they fire themselves. So with that being said, I think the other thing is I've worked with multiple different partners throughout the community in collaboration. And I think that speaks for itself. In working in partnership with Loyola, we were able to get the COVID Equity Response Collaborative launched. And working in partnership with the Maywood Park District, we were able to get the Career and Life Readiness Initiative launched. And working in partnership with the Cook County Black Chamber of Commerce and the Illinois Black Chamber of Commerce, we were able to actually establish a West Suburban Cook County chapter to focus more so on the suburbs, not necessarily so much on the city. And those are just a few of the different collaborations. With working with the census, it was hundreds of different collaborations. So I think me being a collaborator is one of my best attributes.
I want to talk. You brought up the chamber. It's called the West Suburban Chamber. What is it?
So the Illinois Black Chamber of Commerce.
Right, and you're president of the West Suburban chapter.
Yes.
If you're mayor, you intend to keep that position?
Yeah, it's not a paid role. So for me, it's not for it to be a paid position. I think right before we were going into COVID and as we expanded, I'm also the chairman for the Young Democrats of Proviso, and understanding that we needed more insight in regards to business and partnerships and working with Small Business Association and working with the Office of Minority and Economic Empowerment and, working with the different avenues to bring our economy up. It just kind of swayed into starting to work with the Cook County Black Chamber and then the Illinois Black Chamber. So when there was the funding that allowed it for the $10,000 for businesses, I worked as a business advisor with that to try to push to get more funding brought into the Cook County area. And every time we would have conversations with the Illinois Black Chamber, it would be, a lot of things going on in the city, but not necessarily so much going on in the suburbs. So I think it's just being more intentional and strategic and ensuring that the same access and resources that the city of Chicago receives from these entities, that we receive it as well in the suburbs.
A few things. Do you find what's the function of the chamber that you're heading? And is it in contention or duplicative of the current chamber that exists in Maywood? Because Maywood has a chamber of commerce, at least on paper.
Sure. I think you just said it to your point, at least on paper. I think that there are some great people who are on the Maywood Chamber of Commerce. I do believe that there's an opportunity to do more, and there's an opportunity to be more engaged. I think the difference is in working with the Illinois Black Chamber, and they are specifically surrounded around the various different bills that have just passed to focus on, education, healthcare, business access, equity, opportunity for communities of color, for businesses of color. And I think that the Maywood Chamber of Commerce does not necessarily focus on that to the ability that they could. And I think that we know with the various American Recovery Plan Act that just rolled out, as well as the various different benchmarks from the Illinois Black Caucus that the Illinois Black Chamber is working with, that's rolling out. Again, it's more of a strategic strategy to work with those entities that are focused primarily on businesses of color to bring those resources into our community.
The second thing I had is typically when you think of a chamber of commerce, you think of it as a lobbying entity that, when you think of the National Chamber of Commerce, for instance, it has an almost, it's not almost, it's an enemy combatant relationship with the government. In certain respects, it has to be because it's a chamber. And so you want a chamber to be able to be a lobbying entity on behalf of your business. This is why you pay memberships.
Right.
This chamber that you're heading, you don't anticipate any conflict of interest if you're mayor and you're also head of a chamber. Say you get a business in Maywood that is also a member of your chamber. They have every right to expect their issues to be lobbied on their behalf through their chamber, which is why they pay the membership due. And if they're trying to utilize your chamber to lobby the government in Maywood, which you're also mayor of, you don't think that there's going to be a conflict of interest?
So I think the beauty of the Illinois Black Chamber of Commerce is the lobbying that's done is on a state level. I don't see the Illinois Black Chamber of Commerce focusing on, local level. Right now, we have a lobbyist that focuses on those things in Illinois for the state. So a lot of that work is being done in Springfield. The goal is to get the West Suburban Cook County chapter up and running. And most certainly I would love for someone to come on and be chairman at a later time. But right now it's just getting it up and running. I don't foresee myself being a long-term chairman of the Illinois Black Chamber of Commerce for the West Suburban Cook County. But when we talk about funding that's coming into the community, when we talk about resources that are coming into the community, I think for me, it's just making sure that we're at the table and that we're getting served. It's not necessarily dealing with the legislative side of it. There are committees and there are areas that focus on that. And we do have conversations about it. But I'm more so once those conversations have been done on a state level, like once we've passed this new Senate bill, like what does that look like when we say access, opportunity, and equity? What does that look like for Maywood and our surrounding communities, not just the city of Chicago? Because I find myself when we're having conversations with all of the various different, business entities, a lot of times it'll shift to Oak Park, Berwyn, River Forest, Merrill's Park, but not necessarily Maywood or its surrounding communities. So my goal as chairman is to get that conversation to the table, and prayerfully sooner than later, we definitely would have somebody to take that over, and I wouldn't have to be thinking about that. But I don't think it would be a conflict of interest in regards to having a business, because realistically, every business in the village of Maywood would want, if they're going to fight for certain things on a local policy standpoint, I would want to hear them the same way. if they're looking for legislation to be done on a state level, I would direct them to go work with the Illinois Black Chamber, SBA, or Office of Minority Economic Empowerment to get those things done. I wouldn't look at it as a conflict of interest, more so of a benefit, because
Okay.
you know how to direct.
Okay, I'll give you a possible real world situation which could, happen. You're chairman of the chamber. You have a member who has a business who's a member of your chamber, who is seeking a tax incentive, for instance.
Okay.
Do you recuse yourself in that situation?
If I just have a member that's seeking a tax incentive?
If you have a member, a business that's a member of your chamber coming before the board, wanting the board to sign off on a tax incentive, so that they could go to the county in order to
Gotcha.
get that incentive, which you guys do all the time.
I got you.
Do you
No,
recuse yourself?
I wouldn't see that as a conflict of interest at all. The Chamber of Commerce is not a personal relationship builder so much as it is economic prosperity builder. When we talk about building the Wealth Center here at the Lyford Center, I don't see how that would be a conflict of interest, because as mayor, it is your job to advocate for businesses to come into the community. So realistically, you have to, whatever hat you may be wearing, the question is this decision what's best for Maywood? So even if they weren't a member of the community of the chamber, and they were deciding that they wanted to apply for some sort of incentive, I think for myself, I most certainly am the one that's more vocal on the board in regards to not giving certain entities incentives, as well as justifying why we would give certain entities incentives. When you look at our different incentives, there are over 18 businesses that receive various incentives, and I can't say that all of them. I would have questioned a lot of those incentives, because they don't really go to community investment, and they don't really go towards putting the tax dollars in a revitalization mode. So I think when we look at incentives, we have to be strategic about who's going to get an incentive. And I would hope that whomever's a part of the chamber, if their incentive request makes sense, then it makes sense from a business decision, not from a personal friendship decision. So I don't see how that would be a conflict of interest. It's no different than a business walking in off the street and us having conversation.
So just to be clear, we're not talking about personal friendships. I'm saying
Right.
that you don't think that your role as head of a chamber necessitates you recusing yourself if a member of that chamber comes before the board to try to get the board to approve a tax incentive.
I think it would be my job and my duty to convey that they are a member of the chamber. They did approach me for an incentive, and I directed them to the community development department. I've never gone over whatever they're about to present to the board. I've never seen it. I didn't help them put it together. The moment that they asked about an incentive, I directed them to the community development department. I think from a transparent standpoint, that's what I would do.
Gotcha.
But
you'll be transparent, and then you vote. You vote on it.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. I want to get to a pressing issue, and that's regarding the death of Ruth Johnson about 2 years ago, I want to say, on Father's Day. It's a case involving Maywood police, who immediately before she was murdered in the car that she was traveling in, police had been chasing somebody, which led to a crash that she was in, and she was the one fatality. The relatives of Ruth Johnson have been very disappointed about both the villages and the police department's response and their handling of the situation. I believe you all approved the police chief's request to hire an independent outside investigator, a firm, to look into this crash. What's the status of that now, 2 years later?
So for me, the last time that was brought to the board, we did authorize an investigator, and it's still an ongoing legal situation.
After 2 years?
Yes. I don't know how I can As a board member, all we can do is ask for what's the updates in regards to the legality of it.
So if this
So
thing drags on for like another 4 or 5 years, is that
I
going
don't,
to be
I don't,
your
I,
answer?
I don't, I don't foresee it dragging on for another 4 or 5 years, right? But I do think that that is something. I mean, and let me just say first and foremost, condolences to the family, and that is something that we need to keep in mind. That these are real people and these are real families that are going through these types of issues. So I don't want for a moment to take away from that. But I also want to say that, with dealing with legal, with dealing with insurance, with dealing with discussion that realistically is still a closed session topic, I don't know exactly, aside from saying I am trusting and following up with legal, trusting and following up with the police department to see where we are with it, because right now it still is a closed session conversation topic.
But I think that the request that was asked by a trustee was that you all get updates every 2 or 3 weeks, which would be dependent because you need those updates in order to sign off on the next bill. Because I think you're doing it
Right.
every so often. Then they get the $5,000 that they're. So do you know how much you guys that this investigation has cost so far? When we're talking about
I,
cost savings and stuff.
I do not know how much it's cost, but I do know that we definitely don't get updates every 2 weeks, but we have been updated on it a couple of times. Again, it's one of the various legal matters that go on within the village, and us requesting updates for, again, closed session conversations, because even as like what you're saying, you understand, and what like these are all closed session conversations right now. So there's nothing that I can speak of from a legal standpoint as a legal representative of the village, to answer a question for you any better at this point. It's a matter that we're receiving updates on. It's a matter that's a legal, police and investigation issue. It is something that I can acknowledge Chief Tally did. You know, we agreed to have an outside source investigated. Aside from that, as it being a closed legal topic right now, I don't know what else to say.
Do you think that that there's a problem with respect to police chases in the Maywood Police Department?
I think that there are opportunities that exist in working smarter, not harder, in every department. Specifically for the police, yes, I do think that there's opportunities for various revamps within the police department, and opportunities that exist not from just an accountability and transparency standpoint, but also proper training, more training, more sensitivity, more consciousness in regards to various things that are made available to our police department. We have various members who recently joined or have been in there for quite some time that might need some various different training aspects brought back into them, maybe some going over to a conference, maybe doing some different trainings to develop them as a force. I think those are the opportunities that exist. So I think when we talk about specifically the high-speed chases, there is, de-escalation training that can be done. There are, motor transportation, be more aware when it's done. And then there's also training in regards to effectively driving as an officer. I can't say every training that they've done, but I do know that there is definitely more opportunity in regards to nurturing and developing our police force.
This kind of leads into the village's COVID-19 protocols and the mitigations. You probably are familiar with the huge outbreak of COVID-19 that broke out. Not just, it was the police department, that was probably the latest that we reported on, but there have been multiple outbreaks in Village Hall as well, in a few departments. Do you think that the village has handled this pandemic appropriately, and that they've taken appropriate steps? Because I know the one thing that was said among village officials to me was that they, not after the most recent outbreak in the police department a few months ago, but the one before that, I was told by the manager that they'll implement, a village-wide mitigation strategy.
Mm-hmm.
So do you feel like that's happened? And if
No.
you're mayor, is that something the mayor is responsible for? Or
So
how would you approach this, and how would you govern it in a pandemic if you were mayor?
Sure. So I think if you look at when the pandemic first hit, first thing I did on the maywoodtogether.com website that I developed as when I became trustee, which is doesn't endorse that I'm running for mayor right now or anything. It's literally a communications website. I immediately put to that information in regards to COVID-19, the dangers of COVID-19, as well as hosted multiple Zoom calls in partnership with Loyola, Proviso Partners for Health. We did partnerships in regards to River Edge Hospital, suicide prevention, mental health care. I think that we definitely could have done a better job from a village hall standpoint in regards to COVID-19. Like I said, I'm very thankful that I was able to work with Loyola to get the COVID equity response collaborative up and running, and they've been amazing in regards to COVID response. We're now looking to do vaccinations, so that's an amazing thing. Updating our residents in regards to what the protocols were, I think could have most certainly been done better. Updating our businesses in regards to what they were going to have being done as a COVID-19, as well as more inspections and violations and ticketing and revenues could have been driven from making sure that they were able to do that. I think could have most certainly been done better. I have no clue how, when this thing first started, we signed off for the mayor to have certain executive privileges and the ability to spend, I believe it was up to $25,000 per instance without board approval to actually get COVID-19 under wraps and better under control for the village. It's amazing to me that we have so many face masks at our disposal, and yet we weren't ensuring that our staff had the necessary tools that they needed to get their jobs done. We have CARES Act funding that has been made available to us, yet we're not cleaning our facilities and ensuring that our staff are safe. I think that we definitely dropped the ball on that, and I think we can acknowledge that that was done. But as mayor, what should have been done, or what I believe as mayor I would do, is have a COVID response task force team where we actually are laying out from a resident standpoint, from a business standpoint, from a staffing standpoint, and from an overall community thought process. What are the measurements of success? What are the benchmarks of success? When you look at the Proviso Township between Merrill's Park and Maywood, we have the highest outbreaks. And I think it's because the lack of knowledge and awareness. I think we should have created a door-to-door campaign where we went door to door and provided awareness and resources to our residents. That is something that, when I was working with the census, we immediately shifted to adding COVID-19 awareness, literature, information, as well as PPE. So hand sanitizers, gloves, and masks as we were going door to door and knocking, as we were hosting different events to ensure that we were doing our part to make people feel safer and focus on the safety of CDC compliance. And I don't think the village followed CDC compliance to the best of their abilities.
Can you talk about budgeting during a pandemic too? And if the village, we're in the middle of what is technically a recession, and who knows what the future may bring from an economic standpoint. Is the village preparing itself? Is it forecasting out to make sure? Is it doing financial forecasts to align with its budgeting needs and to ensure that it's taking as many precautions as possible within the budget to accommodate a pandemic and a recession?
So I think one of the biggest things with going to the National League of Cities conferences and reading the Illinois Municipal League data and paperwork that comes to us on a monthly standpoint, it was saying that we definitely need to reduce and cut various different departments and various different areas of focus, primarily in regards to our spending that wasn't a necessity. And I think that was one of the biggest parts about fighting for a 0% tax levy increase, because the increase would mean that we were trying to spend more when realistically we needed to look further into our budget and actually comb through and say what was necessary and what wasn't necessary. And through that process, while we were able to find, instead of increasing by nearly $700,000 the budget, we eliminated that $700,000 budget request, as well as reduced financing in regards to closing a $2.2 million gap. So that's nearly a $3 million savings without reducing actual services to our residents. And I think as this pandemic goes on, we'll continue to look for ways to save in funding in regards to being more fiscally responsible. We also have to look at the American Relief Fund. There are many different opportunities that exist with the American Relief Fund that provides resources to our residents and provides resources to our businesses. So that's going to be a huge focus. We also have the various different entities from the the Illinois Black Caucus that just issued some things in regards to health and healthcare resources for our community and mental health services, as well as workforce development and education. So I think it's also about being conscious that we are in a state right now of a pandemic, but we definitely have federal aid that's coming as well as state aid that's coming within their two budgets. And we need to do our best and our due diligence in ensuring that we receive every piece of the pie that we possibly can on a federal and state level without having to say, let's just raise taxes when there's actually funding available for various things that we need to get done.
There was some discussion at the last board meeting a few days ago. I think Tom Cuss, one of the commissioners on the Historic Preservation Commission, brought up that the commissions are now, their budget has been reduced to zero, I believe. And that's one area, I guess, where that's been impacted by the 0% levy. So is that the only place that you know that the village has had to cut spending significantly? And is it, kind of, if you can assuage residents who are worried and concerned that because the village, went without $500,000 in revenue that would have come from a 3% or 4% levy, that they're going to have to cut a whole lot.
So let's do it two different ways, right? If you look at 8 years ago, the budget in regards to community engagement was $25,000. You fast forward 8 years later, that budget is a $175,000. So what did we do in 8 years that made $150,000 worth of taxes go to feel good events? What we did was we stopped partnering with our local businesses. What we did was we stopped applying for funding that could get these things. As I said at the board meeting, when Mr. Cuss had brought that to our attention, there are multiple avenues for historic preservation to receive grant funding. And there's two grants that currently is being looked at and looked into right now, because it's coming up into the grant season and application process, that would exceed I believe they received $8,000 to $10,000 a year. But it's certainly just in applying for one or two grants, or even one grant, would exceed that amount. We need to stop looking at property tax revenue as a catch-all for everything that needs to get done. There are agencies, there are advocacy groups, there's grant funding, there's state funding, there's federal funding that comes into play that doesn't have to have us immediately going to the tax burden budget.
I think you said on your question there, you want a grant department or something?
Absolutely. I don't, to me, and looking at, so I sit on the federal advocacy group with the National League of Cities for Information Technology and Communication, but I also sit on a board in regards to youth, education, and community, and as well as the first tier suburbs for communities outside of large metropolitan communities. And when looking at it from that standpoint and learning how many different funding avenues we have, it's baffling to me how we don't have a department that simply focuses on community funding and resources. And if you had a department that focused on community funding and resources, literally they would pay themselves through the grants that they wrote. So it's not that it would increase our salary, it wouldn't increase our spending or our expenses. It would actually bring more funding in.
How many people would be in this department, and how much would it cost to staff it?
I would say realistically, we would need to start with one. I'm not saying that it would cost a lot, because again, if you got one grant off the ground and that one grant is paying for that person's salary to come on, and then their job is to find, execute, and administer other grants, then they're building out the department and they're building out their job role and their salary based on the grants that are coming in. So it's not necessarily that we're using expenses from the village, so to speak. We're actually, it's a self-providing, self-sustaining department, because their job would be to get the grants, write the grants, and then administer the grants. And I think a lot of times, like say for instance, right now, we had an opportunity to write a grant for ourselves in regards to handicap accessible and disabled homes for seniors. Now the answer was given, oh, we have a partnership with an organization that's based out of I don't know, I can't think of where the big mall is. It's like they service like Hoffman Estates. They service those types of areas as well. So my question was, if we have the opportunity to apply for $400,000 to administer this grant, why are we satisfied that they only service 5 residents a year? And the answer was capacity. And then my answer was, well, if we wrote the grant, wouldn't the grant be able to have an administrator added to the grant so that it could actually be executed? What the answer truly was the capacity to actually even get the grant submitted. I think realistically, when you're thinking about funding and resources, because I don't want to say grant as if everything is a grant. I'm just thinking of funding resources. And that's why I say a department that focuses on funding resources being identified. I don't think it's impossible at all. Major example is the work that I just did in partnership with the township. That was from a grant that I wrote, but the administrator fee was written into the grant. It didn't cost the township a dime to do the grant. So I think that there's definitely opportunities from a state, federal, local, and just when you look at nonprofit foundations, there's most certainly opportunity to reach out to all of these entities and provide funding to finance the department, but also bring extra additional revenue into resources of the community.
There's some interesting questions that are coming up in the comments. So in your proposed grant department, will there be benefits, or can we do an assessment to see if current employees can assist the grant writer as well as interns? There's one question.
So definitely there's opportunities to work with interns. Right now, we do a partnership with the African American Christian Foundation, where they provide intern opportunity, employment opportunity. So working with entities such as those, there's also funding from a state level to work with people. And I want to say one of the grants goes from ages 18 to 34. So most certainly that funding comes from state to pay for those individuals, not from local. So yes, those people will be able to help and provide that. For departments and employees to help assist, I would be open to it, but we would definitely have to look at their job roles, what their status is in regards to if they have a collective bargaining agreement, if they don't have a collective bargaining agreement, but it would be definitely something open for discussion.
Beyond grants, what other sources of revenue will you tap into in order to increase the village's budget and make us less reliant on property taxes?
Sure. So not only grants, but like I said, when you look at different foundations, when you look at partnerships. So when I say public-private partnerships, and speaking with agencies such as like, Trinity Health. Trinity Health owns and operates Loyola and Godlet. They definitely are open to conversations and ways to be more revenue-driven, be a revenue-driven community that builds up our community and partner to collaborate to restore some of our business districts. What we need to do, as I've said multiple times, is put together a strategic plan for every corridor that we have in the village of Maywood. And we look at our commercial and our industrial corridors and put it together as a strategic plan and as a vision and as a package. We are then more likely to be able to go to businesses and express what we would like for them to bring into the community. And I think those revenues would definitely help. And that's one big thing, a piece of a puzzle that I really truly is missing in the village of Maywood. If I was a developer and I drove past and I saw a piece of property, I should easily be able to go to the Maywood website, look at that property, get the specs on that property, see what it's zoned for, see what incentives are around it, and help me understand what I would need to do to acquire that property. So if it's village owned, if it's owned by the Cook County Land Bank, if it's owned by a private entity, who do I reach out to? How do I start the conversations? And I think from a technology standpoint and from an open, transparent process, that's definitely an area of opportunity.
I want to return to business and economic development. I know we allotted 1 hour, but do you mind staying a bit over to continue answer questions? Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't even realize we was at an hour. Keep going. Keep going.
I want to talk about overnight parking.
Sure.
Did the board or did not the board pass an ordinance regarding overnight parking that would have opened up permits to everybody in the village?
No. So the ordinance that basically we updated was just in regards to it, instead of it being a quarterly payment that would be made, that people could pay for the year. So it wasn't like we imposed a new ordinance in regards to parking. We simply made the payment process easier, because once you make the payment process easier, it reduces the amount of times that you have to go back and forth to Village Hall to do the same exact thing. And that's the ordinance that we changed and updated. In regards to parking, I think we definitely did ask for conversations to start in the planning, and if we voted, I know what you're talking about. There was a conversation to open up the parking, and we voted to put that to the Planning and Zoning Commission. And within the Planning and Zoning Commission, there was supposed to be a survey done in regards to, support level aspect of it, what it would look like, how it would look. And when we asked for an update on it, it was still in conversation. But I think that we definitely have a parking issue, no matter what area of town you speak with the residents, and there are people who will talk about parking. Now, the caveat to that, or thought process, is you have some residents who are heavily, no, we don't need street parking. And then we have some residents who are definitely, no, we need parking. So for example, you'll look at North Maywood. I was just off 2nd Avenue earlier today, and I'm sitting there looking, and there's all these cars parked on village-owned land that I know they're not authorized to do. Yet and still, the question becomes, now that you do have a community that has more cars, and you do have more apartments that have more cars, what is the solution? Just right on 5th Avenue, we built this new affordable housing complex with 72 units, and I think it's like less than 25 parking spots. What do we do if every unit has a car? You're anticipating that these people won't have cars, but what if they do? What is the plan? I do think that we need to look at our different areas of town and what are some parking solutions. Even when you look at Oak Park and other surrounding communities, they have different parking areas that have parking permits and things like that to help keep, traffic off of the street. But I think from a village standpoint, we just need to come up with a solution in regards to our parking issues, because no matter what area of town I go to, you have those who don't want street parking whatsoever, and you have those who logically need some sort of parking. Even some of our homes don't even have driveways, nor garages or alleyways. So I'm like, these are older homes, but where does this person park? And you'll find some residents are using their neighbor's parking lot or their garage or their driveway because they don't drive. And it's definitely an issue that needs to be addressed.
Okay, because I had written in October 2019 that, and I believe I was at that meeting, where from my perspective, you all had passed, and I'll just read the paragraph and give me some clarity on this, if you can, that the village was supposed to change the ordinance in several months. Starting in January 2020, the village will sell annual overnight parking permits to all residents, regardless of where they live, for $200, and biannual permits for $100. And the permits will only be on sale twice a year, according to police chief. Any non-resident would pay $2 per vehicle to park overnight on any unauthorized village street. I think I was just quoting that verbatim, either from what the chief said or from a memo.
Yeah.
But I thought that's what was passed.
Yeah, no, I would say you're referring to what we directed to the Planning and Zoning Commission to look into, because it was up for a vote at the same time that we did vote on the parking cost. So instead of having people go quarterly to pay this fee that were using parking permits, we had voted to allow them to pay annually or bi-quarterly. But when it came to that vote in regards to the parking, it was conversation and discussion, and it was up for consideration to have a vote, but we voted to move it to the Planning and Zoning Commission, not to take action on it.
And so it moved to the planning and zoning, assuming that what you're saying is correct. Then what happened?
When we asked for an update in regards to it, they were still doing some research in regards to it. If I'm remembering, because I mean, again, you're going 2019, pre-COVID, pre-pandemic. I'm going to say it has not come back to the board with a recommendation. But it definitely is something. Yeah, it definitely is something that needs to be addressed, and it definitely needs. I mean, I would say, yeah, it needs to be addressed because we have a growing community of people that have cars.
Yeah, no, I asked it because I know people who getting tickets and can't pay them, and they read this article thinking that the board passed an ordinance or was supposed to have passed an ordinance, and then went to the police department, and the person in the department said, "I don't know what you're talking about," which apparently is not. It's not a one-off situation. That apparently happens quite a bit in Maywood, where there seems to be what the board does at the board table and how it filters to everyday life, how it filters to action among employees is just broken. There's a disconnect there. How are you going to address that as mayor?
So on a two-part answer to that, I would say I would definitely work with our social media and news outlets to ensure that we all have the same messaging. Because I think if I'm following what you're saying, when you wrote your article, you wrote the article based on what you heard Chief say in public in the Chief's report aspect of asking for it versus writing the article based on what the actual motion was that passed, which was right.
I thought I was writing both based on emotion, and I could be wrong. I'm not 100% correct. I'm really trying to just see. I'm trying to see.
Okay, no, you're good. But I know for a fact we didn't pass it. I know we sent it to for further review. We sent it for further review. We didn't take any action on it. Mm-hmm. So I think that would be one big part. I think also discussing on a monthly standpoint the various different codes and policy changes that we have voted on from a standpoint of letting our residents know in a more newsletter standpoint is definitely needed. We could easily do monthly communications with our residents in regards to all the policies and all the updates that have been done and taken care of for our residents. And I think that that's something that we definitely need to implement on a better communication scale to our residents. The other part that I would say to your point is we need to ensure when we do make these changes, there is a rollout plan and there's an education and awareness plan to our staff. And it can't just be an email that was forwarded saying, FYI, this is happening. So much as it needs to be, a lot of times what I would do is I sit there and I'll have a conversation with each staff member that's being affected by the decisions that's being made and have them sign off of understanding that they do understand that this has been changed or this policy has been implemented. And I think through that, you build goodwill with your staff because you're making sure that you're not setting them up for failure. Because if there is something that's changed and they're not aware of, then that adds to a problematic work environment where you don't feel like you're being equipped with the best tools from a training standpoint or an enlightenment or education and awareness standpoint.
Got it. I want to go back to business and economic development. You had started talking about your vision for strategic plans for commercial corridors and things of that nature. You also mentioned in your questionnaire a comprehensive plan that the village needs to update its comprehensive plan. Describe the difference between a strategic plan and a comprehensive plan.
So for me, the comprehensive plan that was written about 10 years ago just focuses more so on your community is growing, your community is expanding. And in this region, these are the things that you could work on to make them better, right? The comprehensive plan is something that is supposed to be updated annually because there's codes, policies, and regulations that change on an annual basis. So when we're operating functions of thought processes, that to me goes to the updating of that comprehensive plan. When I say strategic planning, I mean if we're going to say we're going to take on a transit-oriented development project on Fifth Avenue, right? Well, what does that look like? This is not part of the overall comprehensive plan. We need to keep in mind this, what we're planning goes into all of the thought processes and understandings that went into the comprehensive plan. But this strategic plan is for this specific area. So within the TOD project, we would say, all right, what entities are we going to work with? Who are we going to identify as potential investors? What do we need to rezone? What are the purchase prices for the individual things that exist? For this area, what do we envision it to be? So once we go through the community assessments, we go through the business assessments, we work with the various different departments that go into it, we put together this strategic plan, or a package, if you will, of how we're going to go to businesses for this specific area and what we're discussing with them for this specific area or this specific piece of property. That's what more of a strategic plan is, broken down by the specific area that we're in, whereas a comprehensive plan is an entire village thought process.
How do you plan on using the current transit-oriented development plan that PACE and Metro and some other entities just recently completed?
Sure. So with looking at that plan, to me, that plan did not really lay out any strategic thought processes of what needed to be done. It, again, to me, that was a comprehensive plan of just saying, this is what could be done. There was no layout of what business possibilities are able to come into this area. There was no layout of what abandoned properties exist, what lots exist, what is village owned, what is private owned, you know, what would you re-envision? It wasn't, the transit-oriented development plan left a lot to be desired for me personally. I don't know from that plan how you would go to a business or an investor to say, this is what we would like for this area. And realistically, I just, it's a good starting point of conversation. But again, that it didn't lay out any deliverables or smart planning. So like, specifically, what are you focused on? What's the measurement? How are you going to be accountable for it? What's the timeline? It didn't really lay those things out.
And I think just going back to something you had previously mentioned, you become mayor. One of your priorities is to create a new website that advertises properties that are owned by the village.
Absolutely. It's not even that's owned by the village. It's, so when you look at certain different plans, you can see in specific areas of town, and this is why I say each area should have its own strategic plan. But if I'm an investor and I'm interested in a property, regardless of who owns the property, I should be able to go, I'm going to have to go to the community development department for something to happen, right? I think our community development department should be more aware and more transparent in what's available stock within the village, regardless of who owns it.
And these strategic plans for each corridor, the village is going to be responsible putting village staff is going to be responsible for putting those together, or will you get consultants to do those?
So for me, I think the starting point would be for the residents and the community to get engaged with it. I think it would also be to identify resources where we could bring in funding to have the consultant aspect come in once we were ready to focus on a specific area enough to put together that packaging. But throughout the process of community conversation, like, there's a lot of times you'll have a consulting company come in where realistically you could have just sponsored 3 community meetings or 4 community meetings instead of having the consultants do it. I think the problem a lot of times is we rely on professionals of consultants and pay money to things that realistically we could do for ourselves. I don't need to pay $10,000 to put boards up in a gym and ask residents what would they like to see in that area. I don't need to do that. I don't need to pay a consulting company we don't need to do that. I'm not gonna say as a whole, we don't need to do that. We don't need to pay a consulting company to come in and do a community survey of a specific area. No, we need to send letters, send communications, or even door knock to the residents that are within that area to get an assessment of what they would like. So I think it's a matter of working smarter, not more fiscally irresponsible. in regards to getting these sort of things done. But I also think it's an opportunity for residents to become more engaged in the community that we all love. You know, I love Maywood, and I would hope that every resident loves Maywood as well. So if you want the community to grow, I think this is a great opportunity for more community and residential engagement in regards to reimagining the village of Maywood. And certainly we will have professionals come in where needed, but conversations to get the ball rolling is not necessarily time to cut the checks.
We're closing in on some of the last few questions. Thanks for staying to answer these. In the area of economic development, a lot of people in Maywood want a grocery store. A lot of people outside of Maywood wonder why Maywood doesn't have a grocery store. I spoke with, and I interviewed a few weeks ago, Liz Abuno, who's the founder of 40 Acres Fresh Market, started her markets in Maywood before she went to the West Side. And now she's building a grocery store from the ground up in Austin. She said she wanted to be in Maywood. Certain structural limitations, got in the way of that. But among those limitations was, and she was very explicit about this, your opponent, Trustee Isaiah Brandon, brought her in. She was doing pop-ups for a few months, and he didn't have the follow through to continue doing it despite the obstacles. That was apparent because they stopped. It was dead in the water for a while. She had some issues on her end. She started doing them again, however, on the West Side. You reached out to her to try to bring her back to Maywood, to pick up where Isaiah Brandon left off. And she said there was a discussion that she had. You weren't able to pick it back up. But how did this devolve into sort of, a contest between, it seemed like it was a fight between Isaiah Brandon and what he already did and didn't have the wherewithal to continue to do, and you, who wanted to do it, but for a variety of reasons, didn't get the ball off the ground. Why couldn't you all just come together, put your heads together and work together? And I think it was told me that you just didn't want to work with them. There could have been some cooperation perhaps between the both of you. And after 6 months to a year, you have, an abundance of data points to either prove or disprove that this could in fact work. You could have been on the road to something.
Sure.
What happened in that situation?
Yeah. So if you go back to when I first introduced Liz at the first meeting where I even introduced the concept, I acknowledged Trustee Brandon had brought this to the village. I acknowledged that this was something that had been done before, but we needed to do some fine tuning to it. The areas that needed to be done fine tuning on was we had to change some of our ordinance in regards to the ability for her to monetize and financially benefit from having a grocery pop-up market in the gym, because that's where we were trying to do it in the 200 building. So we had to work with legal to get those things changed. So I guess I'm gonna go back a little bit. When you say I did not want to work with him, I'm not quite sure what that means. For me,
okay. Well, maybe I'm making an assumption that may not.
That's what I'm like. I want you to make assumptions. It wasn't. There was nothing that needed to be worked on together. The initial argument that he was making was that we couldn't do it because it was a village-owned building, and if she was making money, then we couldn't do it. Come to find out, just like when you look at marketplaces that are in government-owned businesses, say such as downtown Chicago or things like that, that make financial monetary value, and we just needed to change the code. Honestly, there was nothing for me to fight on. The issue that came from Liz's standpoint was she was on a timeline in regards to she already had markets in other areas throughout the Chicagoland area. I think she had the Austin one, and then she was doing another partnership with another area. And basically the same way that they dragged out the My Civic app, like it should not have taken 8 months to get a vote done on the My Civic app, but nor should it have taken, I think we were at like a 3-month period of discussing bringing fresh produce to the community. And it wasn't that, I don't know what could have gotten it through except for if I wasn't the one who brought it to the table. If another board member may have brought it to the table, it may have been received better from other elected officials. But there was no me fighting with anybody on anything. Whatever wanted to be changed, when we talked about having the food booths, having it sold, we worked with the community development department on how they would go about renting and leasing using the space. I think the problem was, instead of us just doing something as a pop-up, we're not following rules and regulations, we're not going through the code variances that need to be changed and updated as was done in the past. I was actually working to get it done in the proper way to be something sustainable. And I think it was a very unfortunate thing to the residents and to the community to not be able to benefit from it just because of who brought it to the table versus it being brought to the table. And I think one big thing that we all need to work on is making sure that it's not personal. Like, this is business. We are in a community that we love, and we are in a community that we need to work to move forward together on. So at that time, I am not quite sure what could have made them vote to get that done. But I do know that Liz had a timeline that she was on, and that once it was taking certain amounts of different meetings and being sent to different committees, it was just, Nathaniel, I think this is a great concept. I think it could have been a proof of concept for me to have a store here in Maywood. It seems like there's a lot of politics in this. I have other commitments that are asking me and trying to calendar me in, and they're more welcoming. So
it's not an issue of you, because it wasn't your idea. You just couldn't work with somebody else on bringing it to fruition.
No, I mean, I think that you have to think back then that was when we all had first gotten on the board and Isaiah had just gotten reelected. And I think initially, if I have to be honest, I think he was kind of bothered that I was the one who brought it as an idea to get it done properly. And I don't think that that's something that necessarily was gotten over with. Like, it wasn't something that was gotten over. I think that we could have gotten it done, and it could have been something like, and that's why I use the My Civic app as an example, because every time that they would vote to send it to a different committee, or every time that they would vote to have staff give them a different report or give them different information, I would just be like, okay, let's do that. Let's do it. Like, because I don't want you to seem like I'm trying to be a bully to get this through. I'm not saying let's just call it a roll because I got to vote. Like, you know what I'm saying? I was trying to be diplomatic about making sure that whatever concern or thought process you may have, let's vet it to make sure that at the end of the day, you're going to vote for this. So instead of trying to say, look, I only need 4 votes to get something done, call it a roll. I was trying to make sure that it was a unanimous great thing for the community. And with that, it just led to more red tape and more questioning and more, well, we need to ask about this and we need to ask about that. And I think it was just, like I said, it was 40 Acres did not have the time to let this hash out over a 6 to 8 month period because their season was literally getting started.
So if you're elected mayor and none of your running mates get elected, and let's say we have the same kind of opposition that we currently have now, which is an embattled board with one mayor who seems not to have many allies. How do you intend to build consensus, and how do you, because Isaiah is going to be who he is, because he has to be on that board, and then you have other people who are who they are. How do you build consensus with people as they are, not necessarily as you may want them to be?
Sure. I think it's actually meeting with people, not just when it's time for a board meeting. I think when we start actually having, well, one, we need a retreat in regards to establishing what we want to have as our goals and what we as a board agree upon. And it's not about all of these various different agendas, because we all as a board came together and actually laid out a vision that we are operating on. So I think we would always have to be reminded or be conscious that this is the strategic plan for, say, this is our goals for the year. These are wildly important goals for the year. These are our 5-year plans. And when we're bringing things to the table, the question just needs to be, is this within the vision that we agreed to? Is this within the 5-year plan that we agreed to, or 4-year plan that we agreed to? And I think that's one starting point. The other thing that we also need is within our board, the mayor's job is to build consensus, right? So, and with that example of the market, there could have been the opportunity of multiple sit-down conversations and meetings to take place to discuss that. That just would not happen. I have definitely requested multiple meetings that have been declined or just simply ignored, to discuss things before it even got to the board, to discuss things that relationships and tensions could be better. So I think the opportunity of the mayor would be to identify goals that we could all agree upon. And at times that we don't all agree upon, where's the common ground? Case in point with the village-wide village pride. At this last board meeting, we had agreeable enough amount of people who were agreeing to do the village pride village-wide with the expenses in line. And Trustee Jones just had one issue, which is one thing that we were spending the money on. I amended the motion and took it off, because to me, the goal is to get the job done, not to nitpick about little things. And I feel like once we start building more goodwill with each other, I think we also need to work on some team workshops, some team activities to build better rapport with each other. Because I think one of the bigger issues with Maywood is we've always voted various different parties in. And when the 3 or 4, like to the point when we became elected officials, I ran as an independent, 2 of them ran on a party. And when they ran for mayor, there was 3 different parties that got in and 1 independent. You never actually vote in an entire slate. And I think that's essential that people understand when you're communicating a vision that you do need a full slate. But in your case scenario where you're saying that doesn't happen, it's still your job to work with people. Like, everybody doesn't have to like each other. I most certainly cannot say that I ever worked a job where I liked every person at the job, but you still have to have a level of respect, a level of communication, and a level of follow through to get things done, to be able to execute for what's best for this community. And I think as mayor, it would be essential for me to build goodwill, even with those who may not always agree with me.
Finally, why do people need to vote for you to be the next mayor of Maywood? And quite honestly, you can take as much time as you can, because we've been here an hour and a half already. So
no,
this is the last question.
No, you're good. So for me, it's like, I look at it from a simple thought process. Actions speak louder than words. So when we say action, from an action standpoint, people say, you can't run on saying you're going to lower property taxes, but then vote to increase them. So my action was fighting to not increase the property taxes. I'm the only mayoral candidate that fought to not increase them and got them to not increase while being in office. When we talk about working smarter, not harder within different departments, or when we talk about running on rebuilding Maywood with new technology, well, I'm the only candidate that fought to bring in technology that would hold the different department heads accountable versus accepting an excuse that they can't do the My Civic app, but years ago when they first implemented GovQA, they were able to do it. That just didn't make sense. My background is in organizational development, performance improvement, and training, working for the largest hotel company in the world, where I was an area director. And my focus on an executive board that has managed a budget that is 3 times the village of Maywood's was to focus on employee engagement, employee solutions, employee interactions with our residents. So I'll say our guests, but it's in interaction with our guests. My job was to work with the different department heads in regards to their staffing, their hours of operation, going over budget, staying within line when it comes to the employees, to make sure that across the board, no department was treating budgeting, scheduling, and overtime any different, because we were a very heavy union environment. So it's not, whatever the director of the front office was doing, the director of housekeeping had to do it the same way. So in regards to performance improvement, sticking with that. My background has been building measurements of success and communicating those to the different department heads and to the different investors. So I think the best reason to vote for me is because I truly understand that the village of Maywood is at a fork in the road. In the past, we have not had park district, library, school district, and village all working together as one. We are the only slate that has representatives that are focused on each one of those. I definitely feel like we have the opportunity to move this village forward together, which is why I'm not just asking for the vote for myself. I am asking for the vote for Jawan Diane Williams. I am asking for the vote for Deborah Vines, for Melvin Lightford, as well as Antonio Sanchez for trustee, because we are the best team that already currently does the good work in the community. We currently work with the park district. We currently do work with the school districts. We're looking forward to getting the library reopened very soon. We currently are working with our seniors. Every week, I meet with our seniors. We currently have youth engagement initiatives that we've launched. We currently are placing youth and those up to age 34 in jobs, in partnership. And none of this is costing the village of Maywood $1, but we already have these collaborations in place. We already are working in COVID response and pandemic response with Loyola, in vaccinations, in antibody testing, in COVID testing. So what we are trying to do is continue the great work that we've already been doing. We can't talk about what we did 10 years ago, what we did 5 years ago, what we did 3 years ago. We have to focus on what are we doing to move this community forward right now. And I think if you go to www.maywoodtogether2020.org as a political site, you'll be able to see the many things that our team has done to move this community forward. If you go to the www.maywoodtogether.com communication resource website, that, by the way, like I said, it doesn't even advertise that we're running for office. You will find resources in regards to food, COVID, jobs, youth engagement activities, as well as the monthly newsletters that have been consistently being put out. So I truly pray that everyone looks at actions speaking louder than words. Go to each candidate's website and see which one consistently has information, which one stays up. You can't say you're going to you're going to build on communication and bring better communication if you're not communicating it currently. So I think I am the candidate where actions speak louder than words. I think that I am the candidate that sees a greater vision for the village of Maywood, and we as an entire slate see a vision of a better Maywood. So when we say reimagining Maywood, that truly means a cultural shift in prosperity for the village of Eternal Light.
Thank you, Nathaniel, for making yourself available.
I appreciate it.
The election is April 6th.
Election is April 6th. Early voting on Monday, March 22nd. You can go vote at the Bellwood Village Hall, which is 3200 Washington Street. You can go vote at the Mayoral Park Village Hall, which is 1125 North 25th. Or you can go to the Maybrook Courthouse, which is at the Wickham Building off First Avenue, and do early voting Monday through Friday from 9 to 5. Or you can go on Sundays from 10 to 4. They are open 7 days a week.
And residents will get one more opportunity to see the candidates running for Maywood mayor at the upcoming virtual forum that's being hosted by the Coalition for Spiritual and Public Leadership on March 25th at 7 p.m., right?
Yes. So on that forum, it'll be the mayoral candidates. You'll also have the clerk candidates as well as the trustee candidates. So it'll be a 90-minute forum where we'll all be able to answer different questions. So it won't just be the mayoral candidates. You'll also get a chance to see the clerk and trustee candidates as well. And then also one other thing I did forget to say, if you go to the www.maywoodtogether2021.org website, if you click on in the news, you'll also be able to see the post of the 3 different town halls that we did, where we focused on community policing and safety, business, information, technology, as well as just overall reimagining the village of Maywood. So you can see those videos and more information as well by going to that.
Okay, I appreciate you. I hope everybody gets out and vote. We'll have the remaining endorsement interviews tomorrow. We'll be interviewing Mayor Edwina Perkins, the current mayor of Maywood, at 5 p.m. Tomorrow. And we're scheduled to interview Trustee Isaiah Brandon at 6 p.m. But considering how long this went, depending on if Mayor Perkins wants to go longer, we may be a bit behind. So we want to give the candidates enough opportunity to flesh out their answers and to speak in as much depth as they need to. So that may or may not be over an hour. We'll see. We appreciate everybody for tuning in. Again, you can look at this on YouTube or on our Facebook page, and we'll also email these videos once they're up. This is one part of a much more comprehensive endorsement that Village Free Press will roll out in the coming days and weeks. It'll definitely be after the March 25th forum. So look out for it. We'll definitely make sure that we print our endorsement in a print paper before the April 6th election. And any candidate who wasn't endorsed, they'll be able to write a letter to the editor, an editorial that we'll publish, explaining why they are the candidate that you all should vote for. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Appreciate you. Have a good night.
Right.